This is Stonehenge on the day the last stone was placed. Around 2500 BC, the outer sarsen circle was complete. For the first time, the monument stood as a closed ring of standing stones, each one weighing between 20 and 25 tons, capped by lintels fitted together with joints carved by hand. The tallest stones reached nearly 7 meters. The whole structure was visible for miles across the Salisbury Plain, and the people who built it had no written language, no wheeled vehicles, no metal tools. What you're about to see is a reconstruction built from archaeological evidence, what we know from excavation, from isotope analysis, from the physical stones themselves. This is Stonehenge before the centuries of erosion and collapse, whole, standing, exactly as it was meant to be seen. By the end of this video, you'll have walked through Stonehenge on the day it was finished, but you'll also understand something that most people miss entirely when they look at it. Stonehenge is usually framed as a mystery, an ancient puzzle we can't solve, but the evidence points somewhere more specific, and in many ways, more unsettling. This place was built with a precision that required generations of organized labor, long-distance logistics across hundreds of miles, and a level of social coordination we rarely associate with Neolithic Britain. The mystery isn't how they moved the stones. The real question is why an entire society would commit to something this demanding, for this long, at this scale. That answer changes how you read the monument. Stonehenge, as it stood in 2500 BC, was the result of roughly 500 years of construction across multiple phases. The site began around 3000 BC as a circular earthwork, a ditch and bank, with timber posts arranged inside. The cremated remains of at least 64 individuals were buried here during the earliest phase, making it, among other things, a cemetery. But the monument kept changing, kept growing. Around 2500 BC, the large sarsen stones arrived from Marlborough Downs, approximately 25 miles to the north. These are the stones that define Stonehenge's silhouette: sandstone, dense, immovable by any individual human effort. Getting each one from the Marlborough Downs to Salisbury Plain required moving it across rivers, over uneven terrain, through a landscape without roads. The blue stones, smaller but no less significant, came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 200 miles away. They arrived earlier, around 2400 to 2300 BC, but their presence at the site was deliberately chosen. The blue stones were not the closest available stone. They were selected, transported, placed with intent. By 2500 BC, the monument had reached what archaeologists consider its most architecturally complete phase: the sarsen circle, the sarsen trilithons at the center, and the first arrangement of blue stones in their final configuration. This is the Stonehenge worth walking into. Approaching from the northeast along the avenue, a wide, ceremonially defined corridor flanked by banks and ditches, you would have had the monument in sight for several minutes before reaching it. The avenue runs for roughly 1.5 miles from the River Avon towards Stonehenge. It was not a road built for convenience. Its orientation is precise, aligned with the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset. Anyone walking it on a solstice would have been walking directly into or away from the sun along the monument's primary axis. The approach was choreographed. From a distance, the sarsen circle would have appeared as a continuous stone wall. The lintels, fitted precisely with mortise and tenon joints and curved on their inner face to follow the circle's geometry, created an unbroken horizontal line at the top, 7 meters high. The surface of the stone had been worked, hammered and dressed to remove weathering and roughness. Closer up, the faces of the uprights showed deliberate tooling. The entrance faced northeast, 2 upright stones framing a gap. The heel stone, standing outside the circle, alone, slightly off-center. On the morning of the summer solstice, the sun rose directly over the heel stone and cast its light through the entrance into the center of the monument. That alignment was not accidental. The entire structure was oriented around it. Inside the outer circle, the 5 sarsen trilithons formed a horseshoe open toward the northeast. Each trilithon consisted of 2 uprights and a single capstone. The tallest trilithon at the center stood over 7 meters high. The stones were arranged in a graduated arc, increasing in height as they approached the center pair. The effect, standing inside, was of being enclosed within something that kept pulling the eye inward and upward. The stones were not rough, they had been shaped. Hammerstones were used to reduce protrusions, to flatten faces, to create the subtle tapering that makes each upright appear taller than it is. An early optical correction built into the design. But what filled the space between the stones is the part the archaeology can only partially answer. The human presence at Stonehenge in 2500 BC is harder to reconstruct than the architecture. The stones survive, the people are fragments. What the archaeology does tell us is significant. The individuals buried at Stonehenge during its earlier phases came from different places. Isotope analysis of remains found at the site shows that some people buried here in the 3rd millennium BC had grown up far from Salisbury Plain in Wales, in Scotland, in what is now continental Europe. Stonehenge was drawing people from across Britain and beyond before the sarsen circle was even raised. By the time the monument reached its completed form around 2500 BC, the Beaker people had begun arriving in Britain. Genetically and culturally distinct from the earlier Neolithic population, they spread rapidly across the island, bringing new burial practices, new pottery forms, and, within a few generations, the first metal objects seen in Britain. The monument being completed was being completed during a period of profound demographic and cultural change. The people who finished Stonehenge may have had very different origins from those who began it. The Avebury archer, buried around 2300 BC near Stonehenge, just 2 centuries after the sarsen circle was complete, came from Central Europe, most likely the Alpine region of modern-day Switzerland or Germany. His grave contained the richest assemblage of early Bronze Age objects found anywhere in Britain at the time of its discovery: gold hair ornaments, copper knives, arrowheads, boar tusks. He had lived near Stonehenge for years before his death. His isotopes confirmed it. His presence raises a question the stones alone cannot answer. Who had access to Stonehenge? Who was allowed inside? The monument's architecture suggests restriction. The outer bank and ditch created a boundary. The circle itself controlled what could be seen and from where. The interior was not open. It was defined. Stonehenge functioned as a place where access was managed, and whatever happened inside happened away from ordinary sight. The evidence for large gatherings comes from Durrington Walls, about 2 miles northeast of Stonehenge. This was a massive circular enclosure, over 500 meters in diameter, surrounded by a bank and internal ditch. Inside, at least 2 large timber circles stood. Surrounding the enclosure, the remains of hundreds of temporary structures have been found, evidence of feasting on a scale that could feed thousands of people. Pig bones in enormous quantities, cattle bones, all deposited rapidly, suggesting short, intense events rather than permanent occupation. The feasting happened at Durrington. Then the avenue connected that site to the river, and the river connected to Stonehenge. The sequence is deliberate. The architecture of the entire landscape was designed to move people from the living world, fire, food, noise, toward the monument. What they did when they got there is the part we cannot see, but we know the scale of what it took to get them there. The image most people carry of Stonehenge is of isolation, a lonely circle on an empty plain, prehistoric and inexplicable. That image gets something important wrong. Stonehenge at 2500 BC was embedded in a densely used, intensively organized landscape. The Salisbury Plain at that time was not wilderness. It was cleared, farmed, and crossed by routes that connected communities across southern Britain. The monument was the center of something much larger than itself. Moving the sarsen stones alone required a workforce that modern experimental archaeology has struggled to replicate even with modern equipment and prior planning. In 2019, a team of researchers used experimental sledges and ropes to move a 1-ton stone. The sarsens at Stonehenge average 20 to 25 tons. The largest upright weighs approximately 30 tons. The logistics of moving these stones, extracting them, loading them, transporting them 25 miles, raising them, fitting the lintels, required sustained coordination across years, probably decades. This meant feeding workers, housing them, organizing labor across seasons, maintaining the social authority to compel or persuade thousands of people to spend significant portions of their lives on a project that would take generations to complete. The people who began building Stonehenge never saw it finished. The people who finished it had never known the site without some version of it already standing. That continuity is the part that shifts everything. Stonehenge required a society capable of transmitting purpose across generations, of maintaining a collective commitment to something that extended beyond any individual lifetime. Whatever beliefs animated the construction, they were stable and compelling enough to survive the deaths of everyone who first held them. The stones are evidence of that continuity. Every mortise joint, every dressed surface, every precisely aligned axis is evidence that the people who made it understood exactly what they were making and why it had to be made right. Stonehenge was not the end of something. It was the peak of a tradition that had been building across Neolithic Britain for centuries. Hundreds of other henges existed across Britain, circular enclosures of earth, timber, or stone. Avebury, 17 miles north of Stonehenge, enclosed an area large enough to contain Stonehenge several times over. The Ring of Brodgar in Orkney, Castlereagh in Cumbria, the Callanish Stones in the Outer Hebrides. These places formed a network of monumental sites spread across the island, each one the product of organized community effort, each one oriented with astronomical precision. Stonehenge was the most architecturally refined of them, the only one with dressed sarsen stones, the only one with lintels fitted using woodworking joints applied to stone. The care invested in its construction had no practical parallel anywhere else in Neolithic or early Bronze Age Britain. Within a few centuries of its completion, the tradition that produced it began to fade. The great henge-building phase ended. New burial practices replaced the communal monuments. The landscape shifted toward individual prestige, toward metal weapons and gold ornaments and single graves. The society that finished Stonehenge was giving way to something different. The monument stayed. It was used, added to, modified through the Bronze Age, but the intensive labor that had built it was never repeated. Whatever made it possible, whatever social structure, whatever belief system, whatever form of authority dissolved over the following centuries, leaving the stones behind as the only legible evidence it ever existed. Standing inside Stonehenge on the day it was finished, what you would have seen was a society's full capacity made physical. Every decision encoded in the stone, the orientation, the joinery, the selection of materials from 200 miles away, reflected something that had been maintained across generations with no guarantee it would ever be completed. The people who hauled the first sarsen from Marlborough Downs were not alive when the last lintel was seated. That's what the monument actually records. A commitment that outlasted everyone who made it. We tend to look at Stonehenge and ask what we're missing, what secret purpose, what lost knowledge could explain it. But the architecture answers most of the question on its own. The precision is the point. The scale is the point. The effort, sustained across centuries and generations, is the point. Whatever the monument meant to the people who built it, they made certain it would still be standing long after they were gone. It has been standing for 4,500 years. If there's another place, another moment in history you'd like to see reconstructed and walked through, let me know in the comments. I'd love to keep exploring the past with you. Thank you for watching.